Welcome to California in Focus. I'm Eliana Kernodle. U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson told reporters this past Monday that he supports adding conditions to any federal aid to California over the Los Angeles wildfires, citing his position that state and local leaders were, quote, derelict in their duty, unquote. Joining me to dig into this is the Center Square's California reporter, Kenneth Schrupp. Kenneth, what are Speaker Johnson's concerns?
Well, Johnson laid out a lot of his concerns in earlier communications that he put out. He did say that there is, quote unquote, feckless leadership in the state, and said that Newsom had blocked water policy that reserves water from the north to be available in times like this, something Newsom refuted, and, quote, failed to manage California's forests effectively. Johnson also said that LA Mayor Karen Bass not only made major cuts to the fire department, but that she, quote, left for Africa, end quote, as a member of a Biden administration delegation to Ghana, despite her advanced warnings about the fires. Bass did go to Ghana for the inauguration of the country's new president. Ghana is a fairly stable democratic country that we do have close ties with. And it does seem like she did receive warning that these would be especially dangerous fires, but decided to leave anyway. During a interview with the LA Times during her election campaign against Rick Caruso, they did ask her whether she would continue going on a lot of international trips, and she said that she would not be going abroad to the extent that she has, and it appears that she has not really held true to that promise, so I understand some concerns there. Johnson's pointing to California's forest management. Yes, the state has about 15 million acres of land that's at high risk for wildfires, and we don't really do very much to contain it, probably because it's very hard to get legal permitting to do so. And in many cases, the cost of getting the permit, even for the government to do a burn, to get a permit from other branches of the government, costs as much as actually going in there and removing all the brush by hand. So we're spending so much of our time and money on permitting that we're getting very little actual brush clearance done.
And why would some form of bailout be necessary here? Because when he says federal aid, to be clear, he's talking about some kind of bailout, not like FEMA aid or something, right?
It's a bit of both. But we'll need, first of all, there does need to be some form of environmental remediation. We have a lot of old houses that were burnt down, probably had asbestos. Remember after the World Trade Center attacks, we had to do a lot of cleanup for a very long time to get a lot of these hazardous materials out of the air and carted to somewhere safe. That's something that's very expensive and going to take a lot of time. FEMA is probably the federal agency that is going to have to oversee that and get it done quickly. Number two, though, is the state's insurance market. The insurance market in California has been governed by something called Prop 103 that was passed in the 80s. That requires the state to approve any rate increases. But because they haven't approved insurance rate increases that are commensurate with costs, damage, and risk from poor forest management, all of these insurers don't have any money. The California Fair Plan, which is the insurer of last resort that people are forced onto, they are not allowed to pass the cost of reinsurance on to people. So they don't really have any money to pay people with. Other than an assessment on every single Fair Plan customer in the state, which for a fire like the ones that we're seeing all across Southern California, you could see assessments that are in the tens of thousands of dollars for every single citizen who's on that plan. And I don't think that's likely to happen. The state has proposed a $2.5 billion wildfire bailout or rescue plan, but that's not really going to cut it, because already estimates are for the $200 billion range for damage from this fire. So $2.5 billion is not going to cut it. It seems like it's going to have to be a federal bailout and disaster response of some kind.
One apparent policy failure is there's a reservoir that was empty. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power maintains something called the Santa Ynez Reservoir. It's a hilltop reservoir that's been empty since early 2024 for repairs to its plastic cover, because without a cover, I guess that water wasn't really supposed to be safe and drinkable anymore. It's a 117 million gallon reservoir, so it's quite large. And many are pointing out that because of its high elevation, it could have maintained water pressure for hydrants that lost water pressure during the peak of the fire as it was taking out some of the town below. These are some very, low fire risk homes that weren't even supposed to have been in the fire zone, that people were able to get insurance for, but the hydrants ran dry. So Newsom has ordered an investigation into why this reservoir was empty. He didn't exactly say that the hydrants ran empty because of the reservoir being empty, but he did tie the two together in a letter demanding an investigation into the unavailability of water supplies from the reservoir and the loss of pressure from the hydrants.
What actions, aside from this, is Governor Newsom taking to address, the response, the recovery from these wildfires?
One thing is Newsom is allowing students who are attending schools that burned down to be exempted from residency requirements for public schools. So they will be allowed to go to public schools within LA County of their choice. Of course, there are those who advocate for so-called school choice policies and who wonder why it took a natural disaster for this to become his policy and why it's only for victims of wildfires. As I mentioned before, Newsom is also advancing a $2.5 billion wildfire relief proposal. He's adding that controversially to his special Trump-proofing legislative session that has two bills included in it currently. One would provide $25 million in legal funding for lawsuits against the Trump administration, and another $25 million mostly for deportation defense for anticipated illegal or legal immigrants who the federal government wishes to remove.
Well, Kenneth, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.